Good evening, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good night, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, let's get into the news. And it looks like there's some issues going on out there in Europe, involving Russia and, of course, Germany in the Nord Stream pipeline that supplies and natural gas to Germany from Russia. And apparently, it was sabotage, or that's what is starting to look like. There has been some recordings of explosions under the water around the Nord Stream pipeline. And many are suggesting that it could have been the United States who has caused to sabotage our own government. That doesn't surprise me at all by the Biden regime, who is pushing for more violence in Europe for us to continue to send money to places like Ukraine continue to laundered. They are seeking bloodlust thirst in order to change the subject of a failing economy that we're currently engaged in here in the United States, where the populace is upset with all the economic woes we've been facing as a nation because of this regime's decisions to destroy a nation. And to note other words, in order to distract from the failing numbers here at home. What does the Democrat Party have decided to do? Let's go ahead and go on a full-scale war with Russia. Well, that's where we're eventually headed. If we continued this way, if it's proven that the United States had any responsibility of attacking this pipeline, it could lead to a ratcheting up of tensions even further with Russia. So let's kind of take a look what we have here. It says breaking update: Nord Stream 1 pipeline from Russia loses all pressure after Nord Stream 2 pipeline lost all pressure earlier today. May have been a targeted attack. Right, so we come down here, says on Monday Russia Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia to Germany lost all pressure from 300 to 7 bars to cause its unknown. German says are facing a very cold winter ahead. Now this from Disclose TB. Following the pressure drop in Nord Stream 2, a pressure drop has now been recorded in both lines of Nord Stream 1 operator sets. The pipelines have been damaged by targeted attacks as an elite. As a result, after this drastic pressure loss occurred in one of the two lines, and Nord Stream 2 during the night on Monday, and a leak was found in the Danish Territorial Waters. A spokesman for the double pipeline Nord Stream 1 also reported several pressure drops on Monday evening recorded on both lines. That situation is now being investigated. Research into the causes has been initiated in both cases. To security authorities at the federal level have taken on the case. Forensic results cannot be expected within a short time since the seabed has to be reached. However, the worst is expected due to the timing. The three lines affected in the severe pressure losses in Nord Stream 1 will also indicate a largely we can't imagine a scenario that isn't a targeted attack, said a person familiar with the federal and federal government's assessment. It went on to say everything speaks against a coincidence, and this doesn't benefit Russia. Why would Russia want to sabotage their own pipeline where they could simply just shut it off? They don't need to sabotage, and they simply shut it off to the Germans. Now, the Germans in this case are going to suffer the consequence of rent freeze. They're going to freeze, then we're going to freeze anyway. Because these insane policies that the far left globalists have been pushing for as far as climate, what climate change, etc., etc. And the Biden regime wanting to wage this war with Russia. Proxy of Ukraine. Let's not forget what Biden had said earlier this year. Let's go back to what Biden has said, because it's important that we ensure that we put this in perspective of what he was said that he was going to do to the pipeline and of course, inside of. So this is from ABC News here. And it says here, says President Biden, if Russia invades there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2, we will bring in an end to it. Reporter says, but how will you do that exactly since the project is in Germany's control? Biden Dem response, I promise you, we will be able to do that. Let's take a listen. Biden said, let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again, then there will be no longer in our Stream 2, we will bring it in. But how will you do that? Exactly. Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control, I promise you we'll be able to do it. Okay. And all of a sudden, we have this taking place. Let's take a look at some of this video that was caught in there. This is a bubbles rushing to the surface of the Baltic Sea above Nord Stream 1, and the Nord Stream 2 penlines. Danish armed forces let's see. Here you got. So of course the mainstream media will continue to ignore this. But it is something that is worth continuing to look at because of what they're going to do. Here. Darren Beattie also suggest? Let's grab it here. He says, I scrolled down here, said before yesterday, the only impediment to Germany receiving Russian gas from Nord Stream 2 was political. Schultz wouldn't allow it. Germans demonstrated demanding the pipeline stay open. Now that the US or its proxies destroyed the pipeline, Germany is crude. And so the people of Europe are going to freeze to that just so they can own Putin, right? Just so they can say that they got Putin. What a short-sighted view of what's going on. But this is larger than that, because it will help pull the eyes off of the failures of this regime here in the United States, if we're able to calm the American people into a conflict with Russia. Don't you love it how standards and facts seem to change all the time depending on how liberals are feeling? There's a standard that applies to Democrats, a standard that applies to left-wingers. And then there's the standard that they apply to Donald Trump. We know for a fact that the President of the United States has the sole and unilateral ability to declassify documents at will if Donald Trump merely speaks of classified information to another human being. And technically that information is now declassified. The President himself is the ultimate authority when it comes to classified information in the classifying and declassifying process. But don't you find it funny how the moment Donald Trump is potentially implicated in violating the Presidential Records Act and holding classified information, well, all of a sudden the standard switch and you see a bunch of left-boids arguing that the president doesn't have the ability to just declassified information. That's fake news. They tell you, that's Donald Trump's a weak defense, not going to hold up in court as what they're telling you. But you know how I know they're hypocrites, essentially, because of what they were saying. There's an article from Time magazine back in 2016, after Donald Trump was elected, essentially confirming and making the same point that we've been making, showing that these left voids in the media are total hacks, complete liars and not to be trusted. Let me show you guys exactly what's going on here. Let's continue the conversation surrounding Toiletgate or Documentgate, whatever you want to call it. And the left is up in arms. They're all sharing this clip. How dare he? What is this man saying? He's a criminal. Adam Schiff, of course, chimed in. Everyone listen to this. No, that's not how it works. Those comments don't demonstrate much intelligence of any kind. If you could simply declassify by thinking about it, then frankly, if that's his view, he's even more dangerous than we may have thought. Because with that view, he could simply spout off on anything he read in the Presidential Daily Brief or anything he was briefed on by the CIA director to a visiting Russian delegation or any other delegation and simply say, well, I thought about it, and therefore, when the words came out of my mouth, they were declassified. No, people work hard to get that information. People put their lives at risk to get that information. That information protects American lives. And for him to treat it so cavalierly shows both what a continuing danger the man is, but also how very little regard he has for anything but himself. Okay, everyone all of a sudden becomes a legal expert and tells you what the president can again do. They tell you it's an abuse of power. And Adam Schiff specifically said there that President Trump can't just think about it and then talk about classified information and then it's declassified. But that seems to be just the current convenient standard that Democrats are currently applying back in 2017. It was a different story. Here's Time magazine. Certainly not Donald Trump's best friend History and Politics writing why President Trump can share classified information if he wants, when the Washington Post reported on Monday that President Donald Trump had shared classified information with Russian officials during a meeting at the White House. The White House response was to deny that any military details had been shared that weren't already known, even as the president attested on Twitter that he had the absolute right to share facts with foreign officials. Whether or not the president did share information that others want kept secret, a possibility that Russian media downplayed, even as outlets like the New York Times continue to add details to the story such as information about the Israeli sources of the intelligence. He's basically correct that he could share such information if you want to do the reason, says Timothy Naftali, clinical associate professor of history and public service at New York University and former director of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. Goes all the way back to the Constitution and the basic structure of power in the United States. The president is the ultimate authorizing authority. As he puts it, the power to classify and declassify information, like the duty to protect intelligence sources and methods, has been reshaped several times over the course of American history, but the two powers are linked: person or agency that has the right to keep something secret, or the successor agency if original agency no longer exists is the same one, that has the right to decide when it should be made public. The hierarchical structure of government means that in general, if a person has that power, so do her direct superiors all the way up the chain. Presidents at the top of the ladder as at every one's superior. Donald Trump absolutely has the right to declassify anything he wants at will by just saying it now. Leftwards are coping and saying Donald Trump thinks that he could declassify things by just thinking about it. No. Donald Trump 5 words earlier was saying that he could declassify things at will by just speaking about them. And he's essentially making a hyperbolic point. It's an exaggeration that the sole authority lies with him and he could declassify anything he wants, probably even by thinking about it. And you know what, he might even be right. I mean, we don't even know what the legality surrounding that point really is. I don't think there's a decision that's been made on that. But either way, it's not even relevant because Donald Trump declassified everything. Before leaving office, there was a presidential memoranda of covering all the documents that he took related to Crossfire Hurricane. The idea that there's a crime here, well, I'm just not buying it. That of course coping so a Jack left Boyds will tell you, well, what about the Presidential Records Act? Well, theoretically, Donald Trump did violate the Presidential Records Act. That may in fact be true, and even Donald Trump might agree with you there, which is why he was working with the FBI and the National Archives and Records Administration in the first place to come to common ground and come to a solution. A violation of the Presidential Records Act isn't a major crime and felony that we'll see Donald Trump behind bars. We have this from NBC News. There are no criminal penalties or an enforcement mechanism associated with this law. But other federal laws do punish folks for mishandling government records. For instance, U.S. Code Title 18, Section 2071. Someone could face a fine or up to 3 years in prison for. We've covered this law before. In fact, this law was part of the search warrant, and it's related to concealment, removal, or mutilation. Generally, the only argument that you might have is concealment and removal. But I think it's pretty hard to make that point considering the National Archives and Records Administration was actively working with Donald Trump. They knew where the documents were. It's kind of hard to argue that Donald Trump was concealing documents from NARO when NARO was literally telling Donald Trump where to put them. This whole thing is a massive witch hunt. It's a fishing expedition. It's a complete outrage and a weaponization of federal agencies. They would have never gone after anyone like this. Only Donald Trump is held to this ridiculous standard. There's no evidence that he obliterated, destroyed, mutilated, removed, or concealed any of these documents. There's no evidence to suggest that he didn't declassify any of these documents. And even outside of that, what an absolute outrage. They would do this in the first place to raid a former president's home, as if Donald Trump is the first president to take documents home with him. Give me a break. Not to mention, I don't even blame Donald Trump. I mean, as we can clearly see, it's man versus machine. He's being attacked from all angles. They're trying to destroy him. I think anybody in Donald Trump's position would have taken the Crossfire Hurricane documents with him, just that politicized investigation that illegally filed for a phony FISA warrant, that shadow FBI coup that tried to derail his presidency? Yeah, if I was President Donald Trump, I would want those documents as well, because that could be relevant to his legal defense. Considering we know the witch hunt investigations are clearly far from over. This whole thing is a massive sham. There are no criminal penalties for violations of the Presidential Records Act. Donald Trump does in fact have the unilateral ability to declassify anything at will just by speaking about it. Even Time magazine confirmed that back in 2017, and there's no evidence that he tried to conceal or destroy any classified information or presidential documents or records. If they're going after him based on that exact US law after they let Hillary Clinton, who bit her hard drives off the hook for actually committing the crime. This is an outrage and people should be frankly pissed. And honestly, I think people can see that the federal government and federal agencies are being weaponized to stop Donald Trump ahead of the next presidential election. It's disgusting, and it has to stop, but honestly, I don't think it's going to work. I think Donald Trump has a pretty clear defense here, and I think it's another Democrat witch hunt that's going to lead to another Democrat dead. Thank you very much. WWG1WGA. Give me your thoughts below.